I now recognize myself for an opening statement. Opioid abuse has become an epidemic across the entire nation, affecting all 50 states. 115 Americans die every single day from an opioid overdose. These victims come from all walks of life. They're teachers, business professionals, ranchers, students, government officials, and retirees. And here in Arizona, there's been at least 800 lives lost just last year alone. Some estimates conclude that more than 2 million of our fellow Americans are addicted to opioids. Chances are, every single one of us knows someone struggling with opioid dependence. No state, no neighborhood, no socioeconomic group, no family is immune from the destruction and carnage that it brings. Too many lives have been lost, too many families have been destroyed, and communities all over the nation are asking what more can be done to stop this devastating opioid addiction epidemic. I've called this hearing today to not only highlight the crisis, but to discuss both law enforcement and non-law enforcement solutions that will ultimately save lives. Thankfully, this is not a partisan issue. I'm grateful to see my colleagues today, both Republicans and Democrats, that we can work together to identify the challenges and enact solutions to help families in our communities. Actions to address this crisis will require multiple state, federal, local, tribal governments to work together and in concert with nonprofit entities and the faith-based community. No one can go it alone, because this issue will require a whole-of-society approach. Addiction often begins after powerful opioids are routinely prescribed out of a genuine need to manage pain after surgery. However, patients quickly become hooked, often unaware of how addicting they are. In addition, even after the risks were well known, unethical doctors continue to write prescription after prescription, becoming pill mills that now sustain the flow of opioids to those who are addicted. Last year, 4 of Arizona's top opioid prescribing doctors were located in the sparsely populated Mojave County. Together, they wrote prescriptions for nearly 6 million pills over a 12-month period. An unsecure border enables and exacerbates this crisis by providing a strong supply of illicit versions. Securing the border is more than just stopping illicit movement of people and contraband between the ports of entry, which is often a focus. But since I've been chair of this committee, I've also focused on modernizing infrastructure, technology, and additional manpower at the nation's ports of entry. In fact, my first bill signed into law was fast-tracking our veterans for these critical manning positions at the ports. It's well known that the overwhelming majority of drugs, maybe as high as 90%, that enter our country come through the nation's ports of entry, such as the ones in Nogales and Douglas. Illicit opioids are no exception. Deep concealment within vehicles or in cargo is the preferred method of the drug cartels, and they are very successful despite the best efforts of the men and women in U.S. Customs and Border Protection. To ensure the speedy movement of commerce that powers our economy, we can only X-ray a fraction of the vehicles and trucks across the border every day. We need more detection equipment and more tools for CBP to effectively combat the illicit drug flow hidden in legitimate travel and commerce. I'm proud to announce I'll be hosting the Secretary of Homeland Security, Secretary Nielsen, tomorrow at 2 of our ports of entry, Douglas and Nogales, so she can see firsthand the needs we have at these ports in Arizona. I've been a tireless advocate for the expansion and modernization of Douglas, not just because it's important to economic growth, but because it is important to security. In addition to the challenges at the ports, fentanyl, an opioid 100 times stronger than morphine, is being produced illicitly in large quantities, chiefly in China, but also increasingly in Mexico. The primary smuggling route from China and into the U.S. is through our mail system, where vulnerabilities in the postal system are exploited. In order to mitigate these illicit pathways, we must secure the border and strengthen our postal system. In addition, we've got to increase detection capabilities of law enforcement on every level as they respond to the disaster. However, that's just one part of the solution. Law enforcement and increased border security alone will never be enough. We cannot enforce our way out of this problem. We must also tackle the crisis with treatment and recovery options that help restore individuals to health and break the cycle of addiction. Educating patients on the risks of taking properly prescribed opioids must be standard medical practice. With respect to those doctors who unethically prescribe those medications, they must be held accountable. And most of all, we must support all those who suffer from addiction, their families and their loved ones, to ensure they get the help they so desperately need. I'm very proud to say the state of Arizona has been a national leader in addressing these challenges head-on. Faced with a growing crisis, Governor Ducey declared the opioid crisis a public health emergency in June last year. Then the governor called a 4-day special session of the state legislature at the beginning of this year and signed the Arizona Opioid Epidemic Act. Legislation takes aggressive steps to address opioid addiction, hold bad actors accountable, expand access to treatment, and provide life-saving resources to first responders, law enforcement, and community partners. On the federal level, Congress has been engaged in tackling this problem as well. Legislation that passed the Homeland Security Committee and later became law provide additional fentanyl and synthetic opioid detection equipment to the frontline CBP officers in the Interdict Act. Over the last few months, 57 bills that address this public health crisis are making their way through the House of Representatives. These bills provide new authority to spur urgently needed research on new non-addictive pain medications, ensure medical professionals have access to consenting patients' complete health history when making treatment decisions, provide resources for hospitals to develop protocols for discharging patients who are presented with an opioid overdose, establish comprehensive opioid recovery centers that will serve as models for comprehensive treatment and recovery, and direct the FDA to work with manufacturers to establish programs for efficient return or destruction of unused opioids. And the fiscal year 2018 appropriations bill provided over $4 billion in funding for the development of opioid alternatives, grants for states to respond to the challenge, new funds for equipment to inspect more incoming mail packages, as well as more X-ray devices at the ports of entry. This is a complicated and multifaceted problem. There are no quick or easy solutions. I've invited witnesses today who deal with this issue from many different angles to testify. On the following panels, we'll hear from law enforcement, border security experts, as well as experienced professionals from the public sector, those with a family member or were themselves addicted or found the support they needed to get and stay clean. I look forward to the testimony from our witnesses today as we search for solutions to this grave crisis that affects too many of our fellow Americans.